When Tammy Wynette passed away in 1998, the headlines spoke of a country legend lost too soon. But behind the grief, another story began to stir, one that reached back decades, to a man who had quietly stood in her shadow. His name was John Conlee. Fans remembered the glances exchanged on Opry stages, the gentle way he introduced her songs, the tremor in his voice whenever her name was spoken. The tabloids called it secret love. Others called it respect. Whatever it was, it never went away. Their connection had always carried an unspoken electricity, the kind that made audiences wonder if art had once again blurred into something real. Wynette, the queen of heartbreak, and Conlee, the quiet poet behind rose-colored glasses, seemed to understand each other's wounds in a way few could. When she died, he didn't chase publicity or claim intimacy. Instead, he offered a tribute so raw it silenced a room full of country legends. And in that silence, the rumor turned into something else entirely, a moment of truth that fans still can't forget. Before the whispers, before the tears, there were simply two performers trying to survive the Nashville grind. Tammy Wynette was already the reigning First Lady of country music when John Conlee arrived in the late 1970s. She had built an empire on songs that carried her heartbreak, Divorce, Stand By Your Man, Till I Can Make It On My Own, each one carved from the cost of love. Conlee came from humbler beginnings, a Kentucky mortician who traded embalming tables for microphones, breaking through in 1978 with rose-colored glasses. They met backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, where legends mingle with hopefuls and every corridor hums with stories. Wynette's fame was a double-edged crown, adored by millions, yet often isolated by it. Conlee, calm and self-contained, carried a kind of steadiness rare in that glittering chaos. Those who saw them together spoke of mutual regard rather than romance, a quiet recognition between two people who had bled for the same art. In the Opry's small dressing rooms, music was the language everyone spoke. Wynette, worn from years of touring and fragile health, often sat beside younger singers, offering advice in a soft Mississippi drawl. Conlee listened more than he talked, absorbing the cadence of a woman who had turned personal pain into universal poetry. It was never about flirtation, it was mentorship in its purest form, the exchange of resilience. By 1983, Wynette's world had shifted again. Her collaboration with George Jones was over. Her body was betraying her with illness, yet she refused to fade. Conlee, steadily collecting hits like Backside of 30 and Friday Night Blues, stood as a contrast to the turbulence around her. The press began to notice their shared appearances, benefits, Opry tributes, charity events, and speculation followed. Nashville thrives on speculation. It keeps the lights burning long after the music stops. But inside the industry, they were known for something deeper. Both upheld country music's truest ideal, honesty. Conlee once described the genre as truth wrapped in melody, and Wynette embodied that creed. Their paths intertwined through that mutual devotion to authenticity. In an era when image often eclipsed heart, their sincerity felt almost rebellious. When Wynette's health declined in the late 1990s, the Opry family closed ranks around her. Conlee visited quietly, avoiding cameras, choosing presence over publicity. Those who worked the stage remembered how he carried himself the night she was honored. Head bowed, hands clasped, the weight of grief etched across his face. Then came April 6, 1998. News broke that Tammy Wynette had died in her sleep at 55. Across Nashville, the neon lights seemed to dim. Radio stations filled the air with her songs. Fans left flowers outside the Ryman's doors. At the next Opry gathering, John Conlee walked to the microphone. No speech, no dramatics, just the first chords of rose-colored glass seas. It wasn't written for her, yet that night it belonged entirely to her. Each line, about illusions, loss, and acceptance, echoed everything Wynette had sung for 30 years. The performance lasted barely 3 minutes, but it has lived for decades in memory. Viewers who watched it later described an atmosphere thick with reverence, as if Nashville itself were holding its breath. That single moment recast every rumor. What fans once imagined as hidden romance was revealed instead as something rarer: profound respect. Conlee's tribute was not a confession, it was communion, a way of saying thank you to the woman who had carried the emotional truth of country music farther than anyone before or since. When John Conlee took the Opry stage that April night, the crowd expected a speech. Instead, he offered silence, and then a song. The decision was deliberate. In country music, words can comfort, but melody tells the truth that language cannot hold. And in that moment, Conlee's truth was grief. He strummed his guitar slowly, each note carrying the weight of a friendship built on mutual endurance. In interviews years later, Conlee admitted he hadn't planned the performance. He simply did what felt right. Wynette's passing had left a hollow in Nashville, a city that had already watched too many of its own fade too soon. The night she died, stations from Kentucky to Texas played her classics back to back. Listeners called in with stories of how her songs had saved their marriages or softened their heartbreaks. For Conlee, those confessions mirrored why he'd stepped into country music in the first place: to sing about real people, real losses, and the courage to keep loving despite them. Tammy Wynette's career had defined that ethos. Her life was a map of contradictions: 5 marriages, chronic illness, financial strain, yet an undimmed devotion to her craft. She once told an interviewer, "You can't fake pain, people can hear it." That belief became the thread tying her to Conlee. Both artists carried the conviction that sincerity outlived style. So when Conlee's voice trembled on the line, "But these rose-colored glasses," the audience knew it wasn't just nostalgia, it was testimony. Behind him, the Opry's circle of wood glowed under the stage lights, a sacred relic that had felt the footsteps of every country legend. In that instant, it was as if Wynette stood there too, invisible but undeniable. Music historians often mark that performance as one of the Opry's quiet milestones. It wasn't broadcast widely, yet clips circulated among fans, passed from hand to hand on VHS tapes, later resurfacing on YouTube decades later. Viewers still comment that they can feel something shift when Conlee lowers his gaze during the final chorus, a moment where emotion and restraint find perfect balance. What few know is that Conlee dedicated his next live album to Wynette's memory, adding a simple line in the liner notes: "For Tammy, who told the truth every time she sang. No embellishment, no dramatics, just acknowledgement from one storyteller to another." That was the essence of their bond. It never needed headlines or rumors because it was grounded in artistry. Conlee had watched her weather storms, scandals about her health, tabloid claims about her marriage to George Jones, speculation over her mysterious hospitalization in the 70s, and through it all, she remained unyielding. Her vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was her signature. For Conlee, that lesson became legacy. His tribute was more than a farewell, it was a mirror, reflecting what country music once stood for, before fame began to outshine truth. Listeners didn't just mourn Wynette that night, they mourned an era when songs came from the soul rather than the studio. And as the final note faded into the Opry rafters, Conlee stepped back from the microphone, eyes closed. The applause was gentle, respectful, no cheering, just gratitude. Somewhere between silence and sound, Tammy Wynette's spirit seemed to linger. The woman who had sung of heartbreak and endurance was gone, but through John Conlee's voice, her honesty lived on. In the months after Tammy Wynette's death, country music felt quieter. The radio still played her hits: "Stand by Your Man," "Divorce," "Till I Can Make It on My Own." But something intangible was missing. She had been more than a voice. She was the heartbeat of a generation that wore its scars openly. And for artists like John Conlee, her absence left a silence that songs alone could not fill. Conlee's tribute became a touchstone for the community. Fellow performers at the Grand Ole Opry spoke of it as a moment when the industry collectively exhaled, an acknowledgement that country's golden era was slipping away. The genre that once lived on front porches and in truck stop jukeboxes had become sleek, polished, and digital. But Conlee's performance reminded listeners of the raw truth that had built it all. Ordinary people singing about extraordinary pain. By that time, Conlee himself had long been a quiet pillar of Nashville's musical landscape. A former mortician and radio DJ from Kentucky, he'd broken through in the late 1970s with rose-colored glasses and Backside of 30. His songs had never chased trends. They were built on compassion and moral clarity. That authenticity, the same quality Wynette embodied, made his tribute so powerful. He wasn't performing grief, he was sharing it. Historians note that Wynette's influence extended far beyond her own success. She helped redefine what it meant to be a woman in country music, vulnerable yet unbreakable. She paved the way for future generations of female artists like Reba McEntire, Faith Hill, and Martina McBride, who all cited her as an emotional blueprint. Her music made suffering seem survivable, and that courage resonated with both women and men navigating their own heartbreak. When Conlee sang in her memory, he wasn't just mourning a friend, he was preserving a cultural truth. That moment, stripped of spectacle, captured the fragile humanity that had built Nashville's identity. Decades later, music journalists would describe it as a bridge between eras, the fading light of the old Opry and the dawn of a new, faster, shinier industry. Fans still revisit that recording today, often commenting that it feels like saying goodbye to someone you never met. That is the mark of timeless art. It personalizes loss. It turns private pain into shared experience. And for Conlee, it was perhaps his most important gift to the genre, a reminder that honesty never goes out of style. In the years that followed, he continued to honor Wynette in quiet ways. At charity concerts, he'd often include one of her songs, not as imitation but as conversation, a musical exchange between two souls who had both lived the truth they sang about. Younger artists who witnessed those performances often spoke of how real it felt, how it stripped fame of its glitter, and revealed the beating heart beneath. By the time Conlee looked back on his career, that night at the Opry had become a defining memory, not because it was perfect, but because it was pure. It was a moment when music stopped being entertainment and became communion. And in that sacred silence that followed the final note, fans didn't just remember Tammy Wynette, they remembered why country music mattered in the first place. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest chords. Years after Tammy Wynette's passing, and long after John Conlee's heartfelt tribute, the echoes of their artistry still ripple through American music. Both stood for a kind of truth that modern fame rarely allows, one rooted not in perfection, but in the courage to feel everything. For Wynette, that truth was carved into every heartbreak she ever sang. Behind her glamorous stage presence lay a story of endurance, a woman who married 5 times, who battled illness, who lived her pain out loud, so that others might find their own strength in it. Her music wasn't merely performance, it was testimony. Each lyric, whether in Apartment Number 9 or Till I Can Make It on My Own, carried the weary hope of someone who had known loss and still believed in love's redemptive power. John Conlee, by contrast, carried that same emotional honesty in a quieter way. His songs about ordinary lives, the dreamers, the working class, the heartbroken, gave a voice to people who rarely saw themselves in the spotlight. When he stood on that stage to honor Wynette, it didn't rise from fame or nostalgia, it came from quiet gratitude. 2 artists from different paths, yet bound by the same devotion and sincerity, had become twin lights of the same truth, that country music was above all else about humanity. Their connection symbolized something larger than friendship or mutual respect. It was a passing of the torch, from the queen of country to a man who carried the same moral center she once embodied. The Grand Ole Opry, once the sacred ground of legends, witnessed that exchange in a moment that seemed to pause time itself. Even years later, those who were there recall the hush that followed Conlee's final note, as if the walls themselves had bowed in respect. Wynette's impact extended far beyond her own chart-topping career. She won 2 Grammy Awards, received multiple CMA honors, and became one of the first women to headline stadium tours in the South. Her partnership with George Jones created some of the most iconic duets in country history, defining a generation of love songs that still play at weddings and farewells alike. Meanwhile, Conlee's steady presence on the Opry stage kept that heritage alive, proving that authenticity could endure even as the industry changed around him. In interviews, Conlee often spoke of music as a sacred trust, something meant to comfort the lonely and lift the weary. That belief made his tribute to Wynette not just an act of remembrance but a statement of purpose. Through him, her spirit continued to breathe in every chorus sung with conviction, every audience member moved to tears. Today, fans who revisit that performance hear more than nostalgia. They hear a bridge between generations, proof that emotion doesn't age. Whether through Wynette's trembling strength or Conlee's grounded compassion, the message remains unchanged. The human heart is worth singing about, no matter how many times it breaks. And perhaps that is their greatest legacy. Together, without ever planning to, they reminded the world that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the thread that binds us, the very soul of the song that never ends. Years after that haunting tribute, the memory of John Conlee standing beneath the stage lights, his voice trembling with both sorrow and pride, continues to echo in the hearts of those who witnessed it. For many, it wasn't simply a song, it was a benediction. In honoring Tammy Wynette, Conlee had given fans a way to grieve, to celebrate, and to remember a woman whose life had been as fragile as it was fearless. Tammy Wynette's story was never neat or simple. It was written in the quiet endurance of late-night recording sessions, in the tearful resilience of a woman who refused to stop singing even when pain made it almost impossible. She battled chronic illness for much of her later life, enduring more than 30 surgeries, while still performing for audiences who drew strength from her presence. Every time she took the stage, she transformed struggle into grace, offering her vulnerability as a gift rather than a wound. John Conlee understood that kind of courage because his own career had been built not on spectacle but on sincerity. Before fame, he had been a mortician, a man who understood the language of loss and empathy long before he ever held a microphone. That background gave his music, and his tribute, a quiet authenticity. He knew what it meant to stand before others and give them something that might heal, even for just a few minutes. When he sang in Wynette's honor, it wasn't about celebrity, it was about gratitude for a fellow artist who had made truth her signature. Fans often say that Conlee's voice carried something divine that night, as if Wynette herself was listening from somewhere beyond the spotlight. The applause that followed was not wild but reverent, a sound of collective mourning wrapped in love. And in that stillness, an invisible thread seemed to stretch between two souls who had never needed to speak their bond aloud. That performance marked one of the most heartfelt moments in Grand Ole Opry history. Music historians often cite it as a defining example of country music's ability to transcend performance and reach something sacred. Wynette's influence would continue to shape artists long after her passing in 1998, with countless singers from Reba McEntire to Carrie Underwood crediting her for paving the way for women to tell their truth on stage without apology. Conlee, meanwhile, continued to perform into his 70s, carrying the same steadfast warmth that had made him a constant on the Opry stage for decades. Over time, the speculation and sorrow surrounding Wynette's death faded into something more profound: remembrance. People no longer asked how she died, they remembered how she lived. And in that remembrance, Conlee's tribute remained a beacon, proof that compassion could outlast fame, and music could turn grief into something eternal. Today, clips of that performance still circulate online, shared by fans who never even lived through Wynette's era but feel her presence nonetheless. They speak of goosebumps, of tears that come without warning, of a strange comfort that only a sincere voice can bring. Because in the end, it was never just about John Conlee or Tammy Wynette, it was about the shared heartbeat of every person who has ever loved, lost, and found meaning in a melody. Their story reminds us that music, when born from truth, never truly ends. It simply changes form, from sound to memory to something that lives quietly inside us all. For more emotional stories, check out this video.